Hello, and thank you for joining me today. My name is Tatiana Ogurtsova, and I'm the co-editor of the journal Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics. It is really a pleasure to welcome you to this training session on the process of peer review. So peer review is really a cornerstone of academic publishing, and my goal today is to walk you through what it is, why it matters, how it works, and how you can become an effective reviewer. I'll also share some insights from my own journey as a reviewer and a co-editor, along with practical tips to help you contribute meaningfully to the scientific community. By the end of the session, I really hope that you will have a clear understanding of the peer review process and also be prepared to start or really to optimize your role as a reviewer for our journal at Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics and also beyond. Here's our roadmap for today. We will begin with the fundamentals, what peer review is and why it exists. We will briefly touch on its history and discuss its broader impact on science and society. Then I will take you step by step through the peer review process and the different types of the review you may encounter. I'll share my own personal experience both as a reviewer and as an editor, and then I will guide you on when and how you can begin reviewing. We'll also talk about the strategies to increase your engagement and the benefits of serving as a reviewer. My aim is really to ensure that you leave this session not only informed, but also inspired to take an active role in scholarly peer review. So what exactly is peer review? In simple terms, it is a process in which an author's scholarly work, research, or ideas are evaluated by others who are experts in the same field. This independent scrutiny ensures that manuscripts meet the necessary standards for quality, accuracy, and relevance before they're being published. Think of it as a quality control system for science, a way of verifying that what we share with the world is credible and robust. The process helps to identify strengths, to address weaknesses, and ultimately to improve the clarity and impact of research articles. At its best, peer review is constructive, impartial, and thorough, and it is one of the most important responsibilities that we have as members of scientific community. Why do we engage in peer review? The primary purpose is to act as a filter to ensure that only high quality, valid, and relevant research is published in our journals. This process strengthens the integrity of academic publishing and protects the scientific record from flawed or unsubstantiated claims. But peer review is more than a gatekeeping function. It also improves the quality of manuscripts. By offering constructive feedback, reviewers really help authors to enhance their arguments, to clarify their methods, and ensure their results are communicated in effective ways. As stated in the literature, it serves both as a regulatory and a developmental role. For authors, reviewers are unseen collaborators, and for readers, peer review provides confidence in the reliability of the research they consume. The concept of peer review predates the existence of modern scientific journals. In fact, the practice of having experts evaluate written work can be traced back to ancient Greece. One of the earliest documented uses of formal review process appears in the 9th century, described by a Syrian physician. In his treatise of medical ethics, he outlined a system where physicians' notes on patient care were later reviewed by a council to assess adherence to medical standards, and failure to meet these standards could result in penalties. With the invention of printing press in 1453, written works became more widely disseminated, increasing the need for quality control. Peer review became more common, particularly in scientific circles. The philosopher Francis Bacon laid foundational ideas for systematic scientific inquiry in 1620, which eventually shaped the scientific method. In 1665, two significant journals, being Journal des Savants in France and the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society in England, began publishing research results. The latter is often credited as the first to implement a formal peer review process, although initially this process was mainly editorial rather than scientific in nature. In 1731, peer review had evolved into a more structured system, as evidenced by the Royal Society of Edinburgh's policy of assigning manuscripts to subject experts while maintaining reviewer anonymity. Then the Royal Society of London followed suit in 1752 with its Committee on Papers to formally assess submissions. Since the Second World War, peer review has become an established and an essential practice in scholarly publishing. It is not only to assess scientific and ethical validity of manuscripts, but also it ensures that manuscripts meet the high standards and originality and they are relevant. Today, peer review remains a cornerstone of research quality assurance across different disciplines. The impact of peer review are far-reaching. First and foremost, it encourages authors to strive for excellence in their work, knowing that one's manuscript will be read critically by peers fosters a more rigorous research and thoughtful writing. Second, peer review advances entire fields by ensuring that new contributions are vetted, reliable, and meaningful. It shapes the direction of knowledge and guides clinical and scientific practice. Finally, peer review upholds the value of transparency, authenticity, and accountability in science. It helps maintain public trust and reinforces the ethical foundations of scholarly communication. Now, let's take a closer look at the typical review process. It begins when an author submits a manuscript to a journal. The editor performs an initial screening, and this is where decisions about desk rejections or moving forward to peer review are being made. In fact, about 30% of those submissions may be rejected at this stage, and those statistics really come from Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics and could be different in another journal. So if the manuscript passes this initial assessment, it is sent to 2 or more expert reviewers. Once those reviews are returned, the editor then evaluates the feedback and makes a decision to accept, to reject, or to request revisions. And in many cases, the manuscript goes through at least one round of revisions, if not more. In fact, in Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics, we reject about 51% of manuscripts following the reviewer's reports. And another 49% do require revisions, after which the author submits the revised version and goes through the same process once again. Finally, to be accepted, produced, and also published. So there are different types of peer review systems, and it's important to be familiar with each one of them. In a single blind review that you see in the middle of the screen, the reviewer knows the identity of the authors, but the authors do not know who reviews the manuscript. In an open review model, everybody knows everybody. So the reviewer's identity is revealed as well as the author's identity is revealed. However, in a double-blind review model, neither the authors nor the reviewers know each other's identity. This model seeks to minimize bias, especially in disciplines where institutional prestige or reputation may influence outcome. Each model has its advantages and limitations, and as reviewers, we should know the different review types. At Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics, we employ the double-blind review process. So let me start by sharing a little bit about my own experience with peer review. So I completed my first peer review after I published my manuscript during my master thesis in rehabilitation science. During my PhD, I was invited at approximately at a rate of one invitation every couple of months, and I've completed about 5 to 6 reviews a year. And it's very important to note that I never rejected an invite, as long as it was in my area of expertise. After my PhD manuscripts were published, and I had 7 of them, I was invited at a much greater rate of about 2 invitations a month, and I completed about 25 reviews a year for different journals. Then, when I completed my postdoctorate fellowship, which was in a new field, I started to receive even more invitations because of my PhD, of my master's, and now of a new field in which I became expert as well. So I was completing about 3 manuscripts review a year for a total of about 35 reviews. So I never declined as a reviewer unless it was really way out of my area of expertise and I felt that I cannot complete it because I'm lacking expertise in a certain domain. So the average time that it takes me currently to complete a review is about 2.5 hours. Of course, in the first, I would say maybe for the first 5 or 10 manuscripts, it took much longer than this, about 5 hours in total. And with time, you are becoming much more efficient and you know what to look for and where to look for things and what things are often missing in manuscripts. So the review process becomes much easier and much faster. So I do use a few tips and tricks that I will share with you. So I do use a standard form whenever possible. I always save my reviews for later reference and also to keep track of my own work so that I can update my CV accordingly. And I also follow the 10 rules, the 10 golden rules that I will be presenting to you a bit later on. So as a reviewer, what you see normally is a page like this on a platform where you first need to identify whether you have a conflict of interest with this particular manuscript or not, and then whether you will be willing to review a revision of this manuscript. So if you would like to see the author making changes and you would like to see those changes, you would click a yes here. For editors, it's really a bit discouraging to actually see if a reviewer clicks a no, because in this event, we need to find another person to review the manuscript. And then you are asked to provide a recommendation, for example, acceptance versus minor revisions versus major revisions versus a rejection. This recommendation is only visible to the editor. The author does not see the reviewer's recommendation with respect to the manuscript. I often have questions from reviewers that struggle between minor versus major revision. Minor revision is really when there are just a couple of statements maybe that need a bit more clarity and there are a few grammar mistakes or a few typos that need to be fixed. Versus major revisions is more than a couple of statements that need more content or more details, or they need to be rephrased. This is very obvious mistakes, miscalculations, or maybe even mistakes in the study design that is reported by the authors. And then I also have a few questions about differences between major revision and rejection, with reviewers being a bit ambivalent between the two. So actually, as editors, of course, we consider your recommendation for major revision or for rejection, but we also then look at the second review to make up our minds, and we also review your review in order to decide whether this article meets the standards for a major revision or should it be rejected. Oftentimes, we would reject it if the changes are extreme, if they're very significant, if this really requires to redo a whole new study or even to rerun a whole new analysis in order to rewrite this manuscript. So something really unrealistic, then we would go ahead and reject it. If we feel that with 2 rounds of reviews of major revisions, this manuscripts will be ready for publishing, we will probably recommend major revision. Then there is a confidential comment box to the editor. So this part only the editor will see, but not the authors. And then, of course, there is a box for your comments to the author, where we're asking you to really summarize the main findings of the study, to provide a detailed review report, to both of us, editor and the authors, and also to highlight the main limitations and the strength of the study. You can either type in the box or you can use a standard form, a template that you can create on your own. Let's now review some common pitfalls to avoid as a reviewer. It is important to recognize the most common mistakes reviewers make. So first, don't be too vague. Avoid comments like the methods are weak without providing actual details. So always provide specific, constructive feedback that is tied to what is being actually said in the manuscript. Don't be disrespectful or dismissive. So never use condescending or sarcastic language. Avoid personal judgments. For example, statements like the authors clearly don't understand the field. So we ask you to always maintain a respectful and a collegial tone. Don't request extensive new studies. You cannot ask for a completely new study design, a new data collection, or even a statistical analysis unless it is essential to validate the paper's conclusions. So reviews should really focus on revisions and not redesigns. Do not let personal biases or preferences influence your review. Refrain from making decisions that are based on authors' institutions, country of origin, or language proficiency, some of the details that you can guess sometimes, even if it's a double-blinded review. Don't let your own theoretical or methodological preferences skew objectivity. Number 5, don't disregard scope or relevance. If the manuscript is out of scope for the journal, clearly state that instead of trying to assess it using the wrong criteria. Often, this particular point will be assessed by the editor even before you are receiving the manuscript. So, oftentimes, this will not be of relevance to you as a reviewer. Number 6, don't focus only on grammar and language. While clarity is important, we ask you to avoid making the review only about minor language edits if the science is sound. If the English is a second language for the authors, recommend language editing services without penalizing the content. Don't ignore ethical considerations. So, failing to flag missing ethics approval, informed consent, or conflict of interest statement is a critical oversight from the reviewer part. As editors, we also make sure that we address this point very well. Number 8, don't reuse or disclose confidential content. So you shouldn't be sharing, discussing, or reusing any content from a manuscript that you're reviewing outside of the review process. You need to respect confidentiality up until this manuscript is actually published. Don't delay without communication. So in physical and occupational therapy in pediatrics, reviewers are given 30 days to complete the review. So we ask you to respect that. Delaying reviews without notice to the editor really impacts editorial timelines and also fairness to the authors. Put yourselves in their shoes. They're really waiting for your feedback in time, and they would like to proceed with the process of publishing. And also don't recommend acceptance without critique. So even strong papers benefit from some constructive suggestions. So avoid rubber stamping a paper with accept as is unless it truly requires no revision, which is normally the case sometimes after 2 reviews and even maybe a third minor revision. So whether you're just starting or have reviewed many papers, using a review template can help you stay focused and consistent. And here's something that I've used during my years of peer review. So I do have a template that I'm able to attach on the platform where I always write the manuscript title, my overall comments. So this is my impression. For instance, I would say something like this is a very interesting manuscript. It offers an innovative approach to X, Y, and Z. However, certain minor as well as major concerns are being identified and those are listed below. So I do encourage authors to make revisions accordingly. So this will be just a very short, 3 to 4 lines paragraph. And then I will do a quality assessment using a star system from ranging from 1 to 5, 1 star for poor quality versus 5 star for excellent quality. And I would rate the manuscript based on originality, methodological rigor, significance to the field, interest to a broader audience, clarity and quality of writing, as well as overall quality of the study. And then I could also put in some comments. So this is just like a quality assessment of the overall manuscript. And those stars, I think, visually give a really good representation to authors where they should really focus a little bit more. And then I go really much more in depth into section by section comments. I do look at things like title and abstract, introduction or background, method, results, discussion, references, tables and figures, and then overall. Every time that I have a comment or a suggestion, I would put the page and the line where this is, and I would write my comment and also offer suggestions for improvement. So this is how I used to function, and I've been really having, received great feedback from authors that this form is particularly helpful for them to then make really good revisions of their manuscript. So now here are the 10 golden rules that I followed in my peer review and that I would like you to know about them. So first rule is to be professional in the tone and the approach that you're using. Be pleasant, so encourage and support authors. Read the invitation very carefully. Look at the abstract, look at the title, make sure that it aligns with your area of expertise. Make sure that you're okay also with the timeline that is provided to you to complete the review. Be helpful, so try to provide comments that will guide improvement. Be scientific, so ground your feedback in evidence-based knowledge as well as logic. Be timely, so try to meet deadlines to the best of your capacity or communicate with the editor if you need more time and request an extension. Be realistic, so focus only on what can reasonably be improved. Be empathetic, so always consider the author's perspective and put yourselves in their shoes. Be open, especially to new methods or new ideas that you haven't seen before. And finally, be organized in your approach. So keep track of your reviews and of your notes. You can use templates that you create, or you can just type your comments in the box for this. So those 10 principles will not only enhance the quality of your review, but also make the process more rewarding for you. So now let's dive into the specific sections of a manuscript and what I look for in each. The title should be concise, accurate, and representative of the study content. Many titles are either too long or too vague and not representative of actually what was done, and it could be misleading. Then I look at the abstract. This is the first things most readers will see, so I do assess whether the objectives are clearly stated, whether the results reflect the main findings, and whether the interpretation is present and also appropriate. Then I go into the introduction or the background section. And here I look for a very clear rationale grounded in current literature. Are the objectives well defined? Is there a hypothesis if it's appropriate? Often this section is either too superficial or lacking in structure. The rationale is mostly where a lot of authors have difficulty really emerging the ideas. Why is their study important and why is it important to be done? So then in methods, I look at things like the presence of certain results that are part of methods, which shouldn't be there. Sometimes procedures are not well described, and I ask for more detail. It should be very transparent. I should be able to replicate the experiment or the search if it's a lit review. So I should have enough detail to replicate this tomorrow in my own clinical setting. Sometimes procedures are not justified, so why authors have selected a certain outcome measure versus another. So those justifications are not there. In the statistical analysis, what I often see is a missing sample size calculation, different statistical tests that are not referenced, or there's no rationale for choosing those tests. In the results, sometimes what we see is too much detail that is already present in tables. So we do not want a copy-paste of the tables restated in the results. Sometimes we have missing p-values. Sometimes the results actually do not follow the order of the objectives that were stated in the methods. So what I mean by this is, for instance, a project aimed to look at the effect of a certain intervention on motor outcomes as well as on mental health care outcomes in a certain population. However, when we start reading the results, we see mental health care outcomes discussed first, and then the results for the motor outcomes appear second. So what we want is actually a string, so things that follow each other. They're trying to tell a story that will make sense, so everything needs to follow its order. Sometimes results will include an interpretation, which is not to be done in the section of results. So an example of that would be when authors would say that 98% of the samples were mothers of children with disability, and then they will conclude with another statement of saying that this is mostly the case in other pediatric-based or childhood disability-based research. The second sentence is an interpretation of their finding that 95% or 98% of their samples are mothers. So we want this interpretation as part of discussion and not part of results. Sometimes results fail to respond to the actual objectives, and other times we see new results appear all of a sudden for which statistical analysis were not presented in methods. And often this is the case for correlational analysis that were not part of the objectives, that were not part of methods, and then we see a brand new result appearing out of nowhere. So this is when I say that I would like to see a string that really follows things that follow each other, this is what I mean. So authors need to state very clear objective, very clear hypothesis, followed by methods that align directly to those objectives, followed by results that align directly to the methods and to the objectives that were stated. In the tables and the figures, I look at things like visibility, the presence of legends, the use of too many abbreviations sometimes, the use of too many decimal places that makes the table very busy and less user-friendly and less readable. I look at repetitiveness, headings and titles, easiness to find the results and to understand them, as well as the completeness of the table and the figure. So for me, a table or a figure should be good enough as a standalone thing in the manuscript. So I shouldn't be reading extra text in the manuscript to understand the table or the figure. In the discussion, which I find is the second most difficult part for authors to write, sometimes what I see is too much details about the actual results. So it's literally a copy-paste of the results section again in the discussion. Instead, what authors should do is to restate their objective and then restate the results, but in a summarized form, in a more succinct form. And then there's actually a lack of interpretation of the results, but the discussion is the place for interpreting your result. It's the place for linking your results to previous research and to try to find explanations for what you found in your study. Sometimes I see papers or manuscripts that are omitting certain research for the benefits of their own findings, which is, of course, introduces a certain bias. Limitations is often something that is missing. Of course, we're all very proud of the projects and the research that we conduct, but limitations are present even in the most high quality randomized clinical trial that has been run in many, many provinces of a big country. You can always find limitations in every study and you need to disclose them. Sometimes the directions for future research are too broad. And the most important point in the discussion that I see missing is the clinical implication. It's the answer to the big question. So what? So you have completed all of this work. You've done all of those methods. You've assessed all of those individuals. You made all of those procedures and you found all of those wonderful results. So what now? How can I use this in my clinical practice or in my research moving forward? What is the benefit of this to clinicians, to patients, to families, to the academia? So the clinical implications is a very big piece that it's often missing or is very superficial in certain manuscripts. And then I look at more minor issues like the use of abbreviations, whether the references match the type that is asked in the journal, some grammar and typos, and also count inconsistencies that sometimes are present in results versus the tables. So when do you think you can do it? When do you think you can start being a reviewer and also increase your involvement? So I think that you need to publish at least one paper as a first author for you to go through the entire experience of submitting a manuscript, of getting feedback, of adjusting this feedback and resubmitting your paper. I think you need some kind of a research methods course in your background to familiarize yourself with research and the different methodologies that are out there. And then the aha moment. And by aha moment, I mean those moments when you're reading a paper that has been already published, or maybe you're reading work from students, some scientific reports from students that are part of your course that you're teaching. And the aha moment is where you realize that if you were to write this yourself, that you would do it differently. For instance, you would tell yourself, this objective is really not clear. I would formulate this differently. I would add details, let's say, about the population or the exposure in my objective. Oh, there's missing hypothesis in this paper. Or you can see that the methods maybe are not clear. There's not enough details about the procedures of the study. Sometimes you can even notice that in certain published literature, the actual study design that is mentioned by authors is completely incorrect. So the more of those aha moments that you have when you read scientific literature, this means that you are ready to start being a reviewer. And an increase in those aha moments is a really good indicator for you to begin your journey as a reviewer. I would never refuse reviews unless it's really outside of my area expertise, because it really helps me, myself, as an author to publish and to write accordingly. So if you would like to begin, you can reach out to your supervisor, to your mentor, to see how you can begin this process, or even to the editor of a journal in which you have interest in. And every time you do a review, I suggest that you do your absolute best all the time when you're being invited. So let me conclude by highlighting the many benefits of being a reviewer. First, it's a form of service to your academic field, your clinical community, and ultimately the families and patients we serve. It helps you to stay current with cutting-edge research. You learn from others' work, their methods, their ideas, their innovations. And also you grow as a writer and as a researcher by critically appraising manuscripts. I'm also so pleased to share that our Journal of Physical and Occupational Therapy in Pediatrics now offers a Reviewer Recognition Awards to formally acknowledge outstanding contributions. If ever you want to get more involved, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you once again for being here. I hope today's session has demystified the peer review process and encouraged you to take part. Whether you're just beginning your journey or looking to deepen your involvement, know that peer review is one of the most meaningful ways you can contribute to scientific progress. If you have questions, ideas, or would like to get involved with physical and occupational therapy in pediatrics, please don't hesitate to contact me at either of the emails shown on the slide, and also join us on social media by scanning those QR codes for the LinkedIn profile as well as for our YouTube channel. Thank you so much.